In a significant and challenging clarification following yesterday's groundbreaking announcement of a U.S.-Russia summit, the Kremlin has unequivocally stated that while President Vladimir Putin is prepared to meet with United States President Donald Trump, a parallel or subsequent meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is not under consideration. The message from Moscow was delivered with stark finality, effectively drawing a firm red line just as diplomatic preparations for the Geneva summit were beginning to accelerate. This declaration came in the form of a formal press release from the Kremlin's press service, which was then reinforced by public comments from senior Russian officials. The statement has dramatically altered the diplomatic atmosphere, injecting a dose of harsh reality into the optimism that had surrounded the initial news of the summit. It serves as a stark reminder of the deep and seemingly unbridgeable chasm that exists between Russia's view of the conflict in Ukraine and the position held by Kyiv and its Western partner. The Russian position effectively seeks to frame the war in Ukraine not as a conflict between two sovereign nations, but as a proxy struggle between Moscow and Washington. By agreeing to speak only with President Trump on the matter, President Putin is sending a clear and provocative message that he considers the United States to be the true negotiating partner, thereby diminishing the legitimacy and agency of the Ukrainian government. This move has been interpreted by international observers as a calculated strategic maneuver designed to test the resolve of the new Trump administration and to sow division between Washington and its European allies. The world now waits to see how President Trump will navigate this first major diplomatic test, which forced him to balance his desire for a landmark deal with Russia against America's long-standing commitment to Ukrainian sovereignty. The official justification for this refusal was articulated with precision by Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov during a televised press briefing. Peskov stated that the special military operation has specific goals and that the current government in Kyiv is not in a position to negotiate a lasting peace because, in Moscow's view, its decisions are ultimately controlled by foreign power. He argued that years of talks in various formats involving Ukraine have proven fruitless because the Ukrainian side has consistently failed to adhere to previously agreed upon frameworks. Therefore, the Kremlin's position is that a discussion with President Zelenskyy would be unproductive and redundant. The only path to a genuine resolution, according to this logic, is through direct dialogue with the ultimate decision makers in Washington. This narrative was further amplified by the Russian Foreign Ministry, which issued a statement accusing the Ukrainian government of being beholden to radical nationalist elements who are unwilling to seek a peaceful compromise. These official statements are a clear articulation of Russia's long-held public stance, but their reiteration in the context of the upcoming Trump-Putin summit gives them new and potent weight. It is a diplomatic power play intended to define the terms of the negotiation before the leaders even sit down at the table. By refusing to engage with President Zelenskyy, President Putin is attempting to isolate Kyiv diplomatically and to force the United States into a position where it is seen as negotiating the fate of Ukraine without its direct participation, a scenario that Kyiv and its allies have repeatedly rejected as unacceptable. The reaction from the United States was swift but carefully measured, reflecting the delicate diplomatic balancing act the Trump administration must now perform. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was dispatched to the State Department briefing room to address the torrent of questions from the international press. In his statement, Secretary Rubio reaffirmed America's unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. He stressed that the United States does not and will not make decisions about Ukraine's future without Ukraine's involvement. However, he was also careful not to condemn the Russian position so forcefully as to jeopardize the upcoming summit. Secretary Rubio framed the meeting in Geneva as a critical opportunity to speak directly to President Putin about a range of issues. With the war in Ukraine being the most urgent, he argued that this direct channel of communication is essential for conveying America's position, for de-escalating the conflict, and for holding Russia accountable. He suggested that the summit with President Putin could be a first step in a longer diplomatic process, one that would eventually have to include the Ukrainians. This response is a classic diplomatic straddle, attempting to reassure an unbattled ally while preserving a high stake. high-reward diplomatic opening with an adversary. Behind the scenes, Secretary Rubio has been engaged in a frantic series of phone calls with his Ukrainian and European counterparts, trying to manage the fallout from Moscow's announcement and to coordinate a unified response. The Department of Defense, under the leadership of Secretary Peter Hegseth, is also closely monitoring the situation, assessing whether Russia's hardline diplomatic stance might be accompanied by any change in its military posture on the ground in Ukraine. For Ukraine, the news from Moscow was received with a mixture of fury and deep disappointment. President Zelensky's office released a powerfully worded statement denouncing Russia's position as proof of its lack of genuine interest in peace. The statement declared that the fate of Ukraine will be decided in Ukraine and that no country has a right to determine its future over its head. The Ukrainian foreign minister was even more blunt, calling the Russian stance an insult to the Ukrainian people and a violation of the fundamental principle of international law. The sentiment in Kyiv is one of betrayal and heightened anxiety. For months, the Ukrainian government has been appealing to its Western partners, particularly the United States, to maintain a united front and to adhere to the principle of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. The Kremlin's latest move is seen as a direct challenge to that principle and a test of the strength of the U.S.-Ukraine partnership under the new administration. There is a palpable fear in Kyiv that President Trump, in his eagerness to secure a deal and a foreign policy success, might be tempted to access Russia's framing of the conflict and agree to concessions that would undermine Ukraine's sovereignty. This has led to renewed calls from Ukrainian officials for more advanced military aid and for even tougher sanctions against Russia, arguing that only a position of strength can force Moscow to negotiate in good faith. The Ukrainian government is now mobilizing its diplomatic corps to lobby capitals across Europe and North America, urging them to pressure the Trump administration not to fall into what they see as a Russian diplomatic trap. The news has sent shockwaves through European capitals, where it is being viewed as a worst-case scenario come to life. The primary fear among European Union leaders has always been the prospect of a bilateral US-Russia deal that bypassed European interests and security concern. Moscow's refusal to meet with President Zelenskyy has confirmed these anxieties in the most dramatic way possible. Leaders in Berlin, Paris, and Warsaw have expressed their grave concern over the development. There is a strong consensus in Europe that any meaningful peace process must have Ukraine at its core. The idea of President Trump and President Putin deciding the fate of a European country is seen as a dangerous throwback to a bygone era of great power politics that Europe has worked for decades to overcome. The European Union's foreign policy chief issued a statement reiterating the bloc's unified support for Ukraine and emphasizing that a lasting peace can only be achieved through negotiations that respect international law and Ukraine's full sovereignty. The announcement has triggered a new round of intense diplomatic consultations among EU member states as they scramble to formulate a coherent and unified position ahead of the Geneva summit. There is a growing sense that Europe must assert its own role more forcefully and not simply be a spectator to a US-Russia dialogue that will have profound consequences for the security of the entire continent. This has put additional pressure on Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is now tasked not only with managing the relationship with Russia and Ukraine, but also with calming the frayed nerves of America's closest treaty allies. Within the United States, the Kremlin's declaration has poured fuel on the fire of the domestic debate over the wisdom of the summit. Critics of President Trump, primarily from the Democratic Party, but also including some hawkish Republicans, have seized upon the Russian statement as evidence that the meeting is ill-advised. They argued that President Putin is already dictating the terms of the engagement and that President Trump is walking to a trap that will weaken America's standing and betray its ally. The critics contend that by agreeing to meet with Putin while the Russian leader publicly snubbed the president of a nation under invasion, the United States is signaling weaknesses and acquiescence. They are demanding that President Trump should cancel the summit unless President Putin agrees to meet with President Zelenskyy. On the other side, supporters of the administration are pushing back, defending the decision to proceed with the meeting. They argue that direct talk is not a reward but a tool of statecraft. Figures within the administration, speaking on background, have suggested that the only way to influence President Putin's calculus is to engage with him directly, leader to leader. They maintain that President Trump is a strong negotiator who will not be outmaneuvered and that he is best positioned to assess Putin's intentions and to broker a potential breakthrough. The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is reportedly providing the president with a comprehensive intelligence assessment of Putin's motive, analyzing whether this hardline stance is a bluff or a genuine prerequisite for any talks. The debate is raging on cable news and across social media, highlighting the deep divisions within the American body politic over the proper course of U.S. foreign policy and the nature of the relationship with Russia. This development also puts a spotlight on the specific role and responsibilities of key members of President Trump's cabinet. The primary burden falls on Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who must navigate this incredibly complex diplomatic minefield. He must project strength and solidarity with Ukraine, maintain unity with anxious European allies, and keep the door open for a potentially productive dialogue with Russia, all at the same time. His performance in the coming days will be critical in shaping the international environment leading up to the summit. Attorney General Pam Bondi has also been brought into the discussion to provide legal counsel on the implications of engaging in talks under these conditions. Her office is examining all existing U.S. commitment and statute related to support for Ukraine to ensure that the administration's actions are on solid legal footing. This includes reviewing the language of aid package and congressional resolutions that have defined American policy toward Ukraine for years. The involvement of the Attorney General underscored the seriousness with which the administration is treating the potential legal and political ramifications of its diplomatic strategy. Meanwhile, all the departments are preparing for the summit with a new sense of urgency and a revised set of assumptions. At the Department of Commerce, Secretary Howard Lutnick and his team are reevaluating the potential economic leverage the United States can bring to the talk. Russia's refusal to engage with Ukraine might harden the U.S. position on sanctions, or conversely, the administration might see targeted sanctions relief as a more powerful bargaining chip to entice Russian cooperation on other fronts. The United States Trade Representative Jamison Greer is also analyzing the trade implication, considering how the outcome of the summit could affect global energy markets and supply chains that have already been disrupted by the conflict. The Department of the Interior under Secretary Douglas Burgum, while not directly involved in the diplomatic negotiation, is monitoring the situation for its potential impact on global energy prices, given Russia's significant roles as an energy producer and the department's role in managing U.S. energy resources. Every part of the government with an international touchpoint is now gaming out the potential scenarios that could unfold in Geneva. The Kremlin's strategic gambit has successfully reframed the narrative around the upcoming summit. What was initially held as a bold new diplomatic opening is now being seen as a high-stake showdown with enormous potential risk. President Putin has effectively thrown down the gauntlet, challenging President Trump to choose between his desire for personal diplomatic victory and his country's alliance commitment. By refusing to meet with President Zelenskyy, Putin is not just snubbing a single leader, he is challenging the entire post-Cold War security order in Europe, which is based on the principle of sovereign equality. He is forcing the United States to implicitly acknowledge Russia's sphere of influence and its claim to be the primary arbiter of the fate of its neighbor. This is a bitter pill for many in Western and in European capitals to swallow. The success or failure of the Geneva summit may now hinge on whether President Trump can find a way to navigate this challenge, to engage President Putin without sacrificing Ukraine, and to achieve a meaningful outcome that enhances rather than diminish American security and credibility on the world stage. The pressure is mounting, and the world is watching to see how the American president will respond to this audacious opening move from his Russian counterpart. The path to Geneva has suddenly become much more picturesque. Many of my listeners, like 70%, haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel. And so many of you don't even know that you haven't subscribed. And that is actually what makes the show go on. It's almost like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask again and again, because it enables us to grow and grow and grow. And we're going for the long haul here. And listen, if this is your first time listening to World Global Conflict, you don't have to subscribe. You guys, you're first ones on me. But if you have watched this show before, it's like you're a freeloader now. So all I would ask you is, if you have seen the show before and you like it, help me, help my team here. Hit that subscribe and like button now. And we will continue to build this show for you. That I swear. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. That's all for me for today. I will see you soon. Bye for now.